Hey everybody, my name is Kayla, and this is Dark Tales from the Road. Hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today for episode 29. We are heading to South Dakota, and we're gonna be exploring some different legends around South Dakota. I found a ton of haunted places and some creatures, and I just kind of decided to just do those instead of focusing on just one, kind of like how I did with my Alabama episode where it was the mythical creatures of Alabama. And I'm so excited. I have been to South Dakota for a hockey tournament that my brother was in, and I'd never experienced something like it. It was so cold, and we saw like the world's largest pheasant. We saw the corn mansion, I think is what it's called. We saw all kinds of weird stuff, and then my brother's hockey tournament had this sign on the outside of the door that said "No hunting, hockey in session." And I just thought it was the weirdest sign I've ever seen. And so I stole it. I actually still have it all these years later. And they were raffling off guns at the hockey tournament. Now that I've lived in eastern Colorado and Montana, I get it. I get it now. But back then I was like, oh my God, what is happening right now? But I enjoyed South Dakota. It was a good time. It was just so freaking cold. It was unreal. But yeah. So you can hear the thumping of my dogs running around. Anyways, so South Dakota, we're going to find some legends. And I think they will blow you away today. I'm pretty excited. So if you're new here, I always get started with some history of the state and city that we're in. Today I'm all over South Dakota, so it's just the state, and then I get into the topic of the day. So we're going to learn about South Dakota a little bit. So it was added to the United States in 1803 as part of the Louisiana Purchase, which is crazy. It goes all the way up, actually into Canada, the Louisiana Purchase. And the first settlement there was at Fort Pierre, and that was by Lewis and Clark during their expedition in 1804. There were a lot of wars that had gone on between the Sioux and the government, and they really ramped up around 1854 and had a huge time stretch until like the 1890s. And there was a massacre at Wounded Knee, and that caused the conclusion of the military taking over the regions of the Native Americans. Another huge part was there was a search for gold in the Black Hills during the 1870s, and it was just flooded by settlers to the west part of, during that time it was the Dakota Territory, which included North and South Dakota. But then the Second Treaty of Fort Laramie, it was in 1868, it granted the Sioux people possession of the land west of the Missouri River. And then unfortunately, all those miners, that was the area that they came into. There was an agreement between the Sioux and Congress of 1877, and Congress forced the Sioux to give up their claim to the Black Hills and the areas around it. I don't know how that's an agreement. They had agreement in quotes. So the Sioux are strong people, and they're very present up there. And so I can only imagine, because then they initiated a lawsuit in 1887 that this will blow your socks off, guys. This lawsuit was not cleared up until 1980. Literally almost 100 years later. That's what? Like, oh my gosh. And that is when the Supreme Court had said that the Black Hills belonged to the Sioux, and the land without compensation, taking that land without compensation was illegal. And so they wanted the courts told the federal government that they are going to pay the Sioux more than $100 million for the land. And that's a lot, and they got their land back, but they refused it. They didn't want to take the settlement until the government had returned all of the land in the Black Hills, which was about 1.3 million acres. And they were passionate about this entire land, not just the small amount that they were getting back, because it was a huge part of their heritage. And one place that I read, it said, again, the Sioux regarded it as their heritage and as their basic treaty right. So again, 21st century came around and the Sioux had still not accepted the settlement from the government, which is pretty crazy. So that's 100 years where the Sioux did not accept a portion of land and $100 million. They wanted all of the Black Hills, which I've done so much research, and between slaves and Native Americans, it's just so sad. And there's a huge Native American population up here in Montana, so it's it makes me sad. I don't know how else to say it. So again, I had talked about the gold rush, that settlers just came in like crazy. And then it was also in the eastern portion of the Dakota Territory. And it had the population at the time went from 80,000 people to 325,000 people just between 1878 and 1887. So 10 years, that many people moved in. So, and this was in Rapid City, and it really emerged as, where you go first in South Dakota. I've been to Rapid City. And then with all this emergence of people and Rapid City really building up, that's when the railroads started to come in. They reached the Missouri River in the 1870s, and then by 1886, they had tracks that were all over the state, reaching all the way into the Black Hills. So the territory was incorporated into the Union in 1889, so the North and South Dakota. So life at that time in the 1920s, South Dakotans were living on farms, ranches, small suburban centers, or Indian reservations. Then in the 1930s, the population had reached 690,000 people, which is double the number they had when they got statehood. The Great Depression of the 1930s was very difficult for South Dakota because their land and their crops went through this huge drought and dust bowl. And of course, that all happens during the Great Depression, So they would go find work elsewhere, and they found work with a Works Progress Administration and the Civil Conservation Corps. But then others, couldn't find any more work. They had to leave the state to go find work, and the population just plummeted. And it actually did not increase until World War II. Again, going back to the Sioux people, they had talked about 1880 to about 1934. The cultural life of the Sioux was terrible. Every year they have what's called a Sundance, and it's a very core, important part of their religion, and it was a huge event for the Sioux Plains people, and it actually became criminalized by the government for that span of time, from the 1880s to the 1930s. Was it really that bad? Oh my gosh. So their quality of life is awful. But once the New Deal came around, it helped to improve their quality of life because there were relief programs during the Great Depression. But then, boom, right back down. 1950s, all that federal support was withdrawn. And so South Dakota was becoming a very, very conservative state at that time. And many of the different programs to help out the Indians, Native Americans, sorry, I don't know if that's correct, were completely taken away. And then were tried to be revived in the 1960s. But during all this time, they ended up leaving the reservations to find work elsewhere. It was so up and down, they literally could not thrive there. That through all the 20 years, they just had to move away. It's very sad. Today in South Dakota, the economy is very fueled by tourism. But the biggest tourist attraction is Mount Rushmore. So the 60-foot tall sculptures of the faces of Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Lincoln. I have been there, and it's not quite what I expected. You think you walk up and it's just the heads huge right in front of you, but it's not like that. Like, you walk up and there's an arch and you kind of can stand around in there, and there's like a gift shop and stuff. Then there's a place that you stand and you're still super far away from them. It makes you feel kind of small, but then there's like trails you can take to get closer. So it's pretty cool. But yeah. Also, there's a ton of conspiracies about Mount Rushmore, so I should do that someday too. Just ideas, scrolling through. And then here's some interesting facts. So this one is also about Mount Rushmore. The original design included the same presidents, but they were going to be from the head to the waist. There's this like right at the shoulder. And the sculptor, his name was Gutzen Borglum. If you haven't looked into Mount Rushmore and how it was built and stuff, you really should. He had started the monument in 1927, but he died in 1941 before the work was completed. And then Congress cut off the funding for it because, all of a sudden here's World War II. So that's why they're only shoulder high instead of how they wanted it to be. There's also a sculpture into the side of the rock. This one was super cool. It's a memorial to the Lakota leader named Crazy Horse, and it's in the Black Hills. So the sculptor, his name was Korczak Zilakowski. I tried. Sorry. And I'm Polish. I should know how to say names like that. And another Lakota chief named Henry Standing Bear. They started in 1948, and in 1998 it was completed. So it was 506, it's still there, 563 feet high and 640 feet long. It's very cool. I definitely recommend checking that one out. So agriculture is still big in South Dakota. It's their top industry, and economically, it's about 1/3 of the state's overall economy. So it has a lot of its main crops like corn, soybeans, wheat, and hay, but it's also one of the leading producers of bison and pheasants. That's why I saw the largest pheasant in the world. It was right outside our hotel. I don't even remember what city it was in, but it was great. Anyways, and lastly, the Badlands National Park is about 244,000 acres, and I actually didn't know this. I should have gone to see it when I was there, but it contains one of the world's richest fossil beds, which is pretty badass. Okay. South Dakota is really cool. It has a really cool history. Like, if you've ever seen the show Deadwood, that's in South Dakota. Wild Bill Hickok and all the ghosts there and the saloons and all this. So, I would definitely go visit South Dakota. I really enjoyed it when it was there, but I was in high school, I think. But yeah, definitely go check it out. It was lots of fun. So now we're going to really dive into some legends here, guys. I'm excited about these. We're going to be talking about 4 different ones. There's one called Walking Sam. He's scary. But yeah, there's Hooky Jack, which is kind of a cute one. There is the Little Devils. Yeah, that one's a little bit shorter. There's one about Jesse James. Okay, so there's 5. And Spook Road. Very, very excited about these. So for our first story, it's about Walking Sam. And I do want to do a trigger warning on this story. It does talk about suicide and hanging. I tried to make it not too in depth. You know, I don't know if I should say this, but I have had a point in my life where I wanted to end it. I don't know how else to explain, but I'm just kind of trying to put that out there. And so a lot of times talking about suicide can be hard to listen to and even talk about. So I've read through this plenty of times to make sure that I'm comfortable saying it. And if it is a trigger warning, I am so sorry. This is a very sad story. This guy's super creepy, but you can always skip ahead. Anyway, so let's get ready for Walking Sam. So he lives in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And in that area is the largest Indian reservation in the country, in the country, yes, which is the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. This reservation, there is the Oglala Lakota tribe, and this area has a huge, long history of massive trauma. So hang in there with me. In this area is where hundreds of Lakota Indians were killed during the Wounded Knee Massacre. And now it is one of the poorest counties in the United States. So, again, like, I'm sorry, Native Americans. I love your culture. I know I'm white as white can be, but I appreciate it and really like it. So just, it makes me very sad. Anyways, so in 2015, that area made some massive headlines because there was a spree of teen suicides. And a lot of people believed that there was a dark supernatural force in Pine Ridge that was causing this to happen. And they talked about the urban legend of Walking Sam. I apologize for my dog. So in this area, again, poorest county in the United States, a lot of children witnessed some terrible things. You know, there were a lot of drugs, alcohol, and, these would be seen by the kids, the kids watching their parents, doing drugs and being alcoholics, and a lot of them were abused, and children were taken away on a regular basis by social services. And at the same time, they're experiencing massive racism, which, like, come on, like, that, it's just awful. I can't imagine what these children go through. It's just so sad. So this area and all that going on, depression became a big problem among the teens. And sadly, the average life expectancy is much lower for Native Americans than any other race in the United States. And a huge part of that is that there is little to no mental health support on that reservation. So it could be this Walking Sam that they talk about, that, he's causing all the issues for the tribes, but it could be a very real reality of the depression that everyone is going through. So a lot of children that were raised in these households, they grew up knowing the story of Walking Sam. Like, they would be called suicide spirits or stick people, or they'd say they were shadow people who tried to lure adolescents from their homes at night. And then when Slender Man blew up and had this huge popularity, a lot of the stories of Walking Sam became similar to Slender Man because they called him Walking Sam, Tall Man, and then Slender Man came out, and again, Stick Man. And so it is said that he will feed on the living and really get into their mind to alter their thoughts. Walking Sam is said to be extremely evil, and that he's collecting the souls of suicides so he doesn't have to wander the earth alone. This is what they said about Walking Sam. So he convinces the already lost, depressed, and hormonal adolescents that they aren't worthy of life and they should end it. Such a sad sentence to say. And he is described in these stories as being 7 feet tall with eyes but no mouth, which, like the no mouth or the no eyes thing, just, no. Sorry, I'm a little fidgety at the moment. And he would wear like a stovepipe hat, like Abraham Lincoln would wear. And this part creeps me out. So when he would raise his arms, you would see the bodies of previous victims hanging beneath. So like I literally can imagine him like holding his arms all the way out, and there's just like bodies hanging lined along it. Ooh! And he's 7 feet tall. He probably has massive wingspan. Just like I got the chills talking about that. And so these teenagers that are desperate, depressed, struggling, they actually will hear him calling to them. I don't know what the sound is. A couple places just kept saying hear him calling, but he doesn't have a mouth, guys. How is he calling? So it must be in his mind or something. I don't know. And he again will try to persuade them to encourage them to kill themselves. I'm sorry. And it's believed he targets the younger people because they are more vulnerable and more susceptible. There are some, though, that believe he's not malicious and that he just wanders the forest as some sort of punishment from his past or something, and he's just looking for companionship. And oddly enough, like we had talked about, he's similar to the Boogeyman or Slender Man, but other like cryptozoologists, which is like the coolest thing you could be to like, I'm assuming it's studying cryptids, but I should have looked it up and I didn't. But they kind of relate him to Bigfoot, which is, I think, odd considering people call him a stick man and all this stuff. But anyways, yeah, going back to like him wandering, finding companionship, they believe that there is a spiritual connection between the land and their Native American heritage, believing that Walking Sam is like a physical manifestation of the trauma and hurt that these Lakota Indians experienced on a regular basis. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I just realized in this article, it tells you what he's calling. I read so many different ones. I want to make sure I had tons of information here. And of course, it's you'll hear it whistle to you if one's nearby. So if you follow the whistle, which again, he doesn't have a mouth. So if you follow the whistle, they can actually paralyze you, hypnotize you, or drive you insane. Guys. And if you follow it and you show them disrespect, they hold grudges and they will seek out vengeance upon you, no matter the cost. Some of this I laugh at. I'm sorry. some tribes are very affected by Walking Sam. They fear him so much that they, out of respect for him, they do not speak of him. So in a lot of indigenous places, there's little known about Walking Sam. Like, it's like we have all this information, but is it true? Because they don't talk about him. So, I especially don't think we're not getting the full information about this guy. But they are believed that Walking Sam is one of the most powerful of the beings in the community. So Walking Sam was first referenced in a book called The Spirit of Crazy Horse by Peter Matheson. And there were 2 sightings also in 1983 and 2009. He was sighted around the city of Pine Ridge, and during those 2 years, multiple suicides had happened. Since December of 2014, Pine Ridge had 103 suicide attempts with 9 succeeding. The youngest was 12 and the oldest was 24. And their method was hanging, most of them. So again, I keep wanting to call him Slender Man. Walking Sam will approach you, tell you that you're literally not worthy of life. And then you feel the death around you. You hear all kinds of voices that he's telling you to do it. And he will continue to convince you until you actually do it. But yeah, again, like I said, there have been like clusters of suicide, but none as large as the 2014 where there were 103. So this area is in a literal crisis situation, but they cannot figure out what is going on. They point to a sinister force that's, always been active in Native American tradition and folklore. So again, he might be real, or maybe he's like a metaphor for depression. Again, people take it very seriously in that area. They've actually gone to ask the government for help because of all the effects that this legend is having in that area. So they're actually I didn't look for these because I didn't want to see it. So I don't know if they exist out there somewhere, but there are videos that have come about of teens explaining how to tie the rope just right. And then pastors and teachers stepped in at the last moment to stop a literal group suicide. And they found that a lot of these group ones begin with a lot of disturbing posts on social media. And a lot of the parents began to find these Facebook groups of young people on the reservation, literally sharing suicide techniques and talking about taking their life. Like it was nothing. Like it was just like talking about your favorite movie or something, very casual, very weird. And again, they found more videos about tying nooses. There were ones that would encourage self-harming. And there were like a lot of just very simple messages out there that said like, quote, go do it. Just disgusting. Like it makes my skin crawl and my stomach turn. And it was going on everywhere on social media. But it's like these kids were not only doing this for themselves and trying to take their own lives, but they were encouraging others to do it, even if they were not attempting. And there was not a ton of suicides happening in this community. These children essentially are talking about it and having suicidal thoughts and being told how to make one, how to do this. Just go do it. It makes me sick. There was also a very, very creepy Facebook post that someone found, and it was an image that was shared of nooses hanging from trees near this very small community of only about 1,000 people. And so the tribal police got involved, and they believe that the nooses were left there as an invitation, like encouraging these people from the community to hang themselves. Like, what the fuck? Oh my god. This place sounds insane. Oh my gosh. Don't go there, guys. And I'm sorry if you live in Pine Ridge and if this really is happening or if I'm describing something incorrectly, please reach out to me. I'm very, very sorry if I am messing this up. But this is information that I got on tons of websites. So just message me if you need to. And also reach out to, suicide hotlines or your friends or your family. You're not alone, and people will understand more than you'll ever know. So hang in there. Oh, I'm just so sad reading this story, and I didn't think it was going to be this bad, but I wrote it. So, yeah, and they've reported multiple spots where they'll find nooses hanging from trees, and it's like trying to figure out if they have these, dark thoughts and desires to do it, or if it's a game, which sounds disgusting, or if it's, again, this legend continually popping up. And like I said, there's extreme poverty there, alcohol and drug abuse, high school dropout rates are huge there, and the mental illness that these teens are going through and not getting proper care and support. Just it's awful. Again, there was a mass suicide that was attempted in this area, and a church pastor, his name was John Two Bulls, not balls. John Two Bulls discovered, and he prevented them from carrying it out. Another time, a group of adults found a bunch of teenagers with nooses already around their neck, and they were hanging from the tree, but they got there just in time to save them. Like, they hadn't been hanging. Oh god, it made me sick saying that sentence. But like, what? Oh my god. And then and then it was another group who were all female that were found in time, and a lot of the people that are in that community trying to help, like tribe leaders and clergymen and local mental health professionals, which there probably aren't very many, sorry, and the law enforcement, they literally do not know what to do. They don't understand what's happening. They're trying their best, but like, it's still happening. So I bring this up again. Poverty and the oppression in that area is a huge worry for the Lakota and the Sioux people there. And there's this belief by the Sioux people that the land can feel and remember. And I totally agree with that. I think, I believe in ghosts and hauntings and, homes holding in spirits. And I think the ground is very similar. Like when we talked about Yesteryear Village, how Buck was killed in the cemetery across the street, but he followed the house, So yeah, they really believe then that the land will express the pain that it's experiencing. So that area has seen so much tragedy and bloodshed, from centuries of these people in that area. And they said that these teens are probably feeling the pain and suffering of the land and experiencing that pain and suffering for themselves. And they say that given, that very sad history of the land and the people, it's putting these thoughts for people to contemplate, just what? Wow. So whatever you guys think of Walking Sam, if you think it's real, if you think it's not, The reality is that there are numerous suicide attempts happening, and it's continuous, and it's difficult to see and find. And there's various tribes up there, but they can't figure out how to deal with it. In 2015, there were 6 mental health professionals for the entire reservation. It's literally not enough to make a dent in the epidemic that is going through the young people there. It is said that the people in this area, the Native American young people, were 3 times more likely to take their life. And a huge chunk of that is because the tribes in South Dakota have no financial resources out there to help them, to bring in more clinics and more professionals. And the Sioux tribe president, his name was John Yellowbird Steele, he actually declared a state of emergency to reaching out to get some help. And the Administration for Native Americans, awarded them $44 million in emergency grant money. It says 44000, comma 000. So I don't know if they meant 44 million or 4 million or 440,000. So, a large significant chunk of money to the tribes to help with the suicide prevention. And it says they've established a bunch of organizations and, prayer chains, and, it's still a massive problem to this day. But there's been a lot more campaigns put in place and organizations that these kids can reach out for. So again, whether he's real or not, this is a dire epidemic in that area. And not only in that area, it is all over the world. You find people that have attempted more than you think. You don't realize what somebody is going through. So just like a little PSA, just if your friend's acting different, weird, check in with them, spend time with them. They may just need somebody to talk to, or help them get the help they needed, therapy, a psychiatrist, things like that. It's a very hard subject to talk about, but we are not alone. We have friends, we have family. Even if you don't think you do, you do. Someone is out there watching, helping. Just don't feel like you're a burden. Don't feel like you can't reach out to anyone, because when it gets to that point and you can't do it anymore, your mind changes into something very different, very irrational, very impulsive, very just so. Yeah, if you're struggling, definitely don't hurt to reach out to a friend or even a suicide hotline. It's completely anonymous, and it's just someone to speak to you, Yeah. Okay. We're past that sad story. So let's move on. Deep breath. Okay. We're going to talk about Hooky Jack. This is a little more uplifting story. So he is a famous ghost in Rapid City. His name was John Leary, and in the 1800s he was mining, and there was a massive explosion. He lost both of his arms and one eye. So his arms were actually replaced with hooks, and everyone started calling him Hooky Jack. And he actually became a Rapid City police officer. But tragically, he died after being struck by a car in 1926. But it's believed that his spirit still haunts his former residence, and that residence has actually been turned into a tavern. And so he still hangs out at this tavern, and they say that he lives on the 3rd floor. He can be heard, walking around, roaming up there, and employees do not want to go to that floor unless they absolutely have to. They refuse to work the night shift because they hear voices, rattling, and tons of just eerie, weird sounds that is heard on that 3rd floor. They'll also experience strange flashing lights and like spirit orbs have been caught on security footage. They've seen tables and chairs and billiard balls moving around the table, and the table and chairs moving around the room. A bartender claimed to have seen a full apparition sit at the end of the bar, and just like noticed them out of the corner of their eye, and then they looked towards that area and realized that no one was there. So that's pretty creepy, because like as a bartender especially, you catch them and then you're like, oh, I'm gonna walk over there and serve them, and nope, like okay. At night there can be a lot of strange voices that are heard in the area, and other bartenders, probably similar to the last one, they see Hooky Jack approach the bar like he's going to order a drink. And he's also been spotted looking out the glass door right at the entrance of it. And they say that he lingers there because he's protecting his property still, you know. He was very well loved by the whole community. He had lived in Rapid City, you know, from the beginning. And so he became, you know, everybody knew him. But then he also became like a local legend. So he grew up in New York. He left home at 16 to find gold. And he worked in the famous Gold Hill mines near Virginia City, Nevada. Very, very haunted city also. I hope to cover that one someday. It's very haunted. And then that's when he made his way back to the Black Hills, and he married a woman named Alvina Ruth Meyer in 1880. So in 1882, Hooky Jack and another gentleman named Jim Scott were working at the old Grand Junction mine in Cluster City, and that's when their world went upside down. So they were working at this place in 1882. So then in 1906, Hooky Jack, he spoke to a newspaper or a magazine. It's called the Black Hills Union and Western Stock Review, about what had happened. So this is his story. Quote, him and me were getting ready to shoot a round of holes. The powder was froze solider than a mule at pullin' time. Me partner and me were rolling of it between our hands when the darn stuff suddenly and without a word of warning went off. Whatever caused it to commence operations premature that away, neither Jim nor me could ever figure. Off she went, and then we came to and began to notice places in the scenery. Again, we found that considerable of us was missing. Several of our grub trams had been plumb blown away, and this only goes to prove that the gallant who says powder won't go off only under certain conditions is cleared locoed. I say that it will go off under certain given formula, and a heap of times in between when the formula ain't nowhere around. Okay. I know it was just weird because some of the grammar wasn't correct, and then he would like use big words, but that's what happened. Powder was frozen. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And so they were rolling it in their hands, and it went off. Which that doesn't make any sense to me. But so Jack's wife, you know, is taking care of him. She's using like cloths on his arms and eye, and the doctors just flat out told her he will not survive the night. He's gone. So he lost sight in the one eye and hearing in one ear, because he had kind of turned his head at the time of the explosion, and he also lost both of his hands. He survived the accident, but that accident also killed hundreds of other miners. Like, it wasn't just right where him and his bud were. Like, 100 people died. Like, it's crazy. And then that's when Jack got hooks for hands, and he created them to work with the movement of his shoulders. So I don't know if they opened, I don't know. They were attached to his arms and then stretched across the shoulder and back. And so then as he moved, the hooks would open and close. I'm an idiot. I write these notes, I read through it, and then the next day I forget everything. And then I'm like, I don't know how did they open and close? Yes, that was the next sentence. I'm so sorry. So the legend of Hooky Jack lives on today. There are plaques honoring him in the public safety building in Rapid City. There's one in the lobby because he had died in the line of duty when he got hit by that car. And then another in the briefing room for the Rapid City Police Department. And then another one was given to Mayor Arthur LaCroix by Jack's grandchildren. And then in 1991, Hooky Jack was honored when South Dakota honored all of the fallen officers at the state capitol. So again, his ghost is rumored to just be there still doing his job and looking after the place because, of being a night watchman and a policeman, he was constantly walking around, checking the place, protecting places, stuff like that. And he is believed to be a permanent fixture of Rapid City now. And the place where he haunts is at 321 7th Street. And it actually was a bar named Hooky Jack's, but it got bought out and turned into something different. And he likes to live on the 3rd floor. So that's Hooky Jack. Next is a short one. It's about little devils. So there's a place called Spirit Mound, and it's near Vermilion, South Dakota. And this place is feared by Native Americans. It is said that when you try to hike up the mound, there are little devils with arrows that will attack you. And it was not documented until 1804, but the tribes have said that it existed long before then. So the mid-18th century, there were Indian warriors who were attempting to rid the world of evil little creatures, but they got slaughtered by them instead. So the area has a lot of history. It's very beautiful, and Lewis and Clark made a stop there during their expedition. They met with the Sioux, who told the tale of the 18-inch tall men with large heads who terrorized the area. Then it did get a nickname, Mountain of the Little People, and Lewis and Clark began to explore that area, and they searched high and low for days for these little devils, but they never found them. So, but the Sioux still stay clear of the area. They don't like it, but tourists will come there to look for the tiny men with the bows and arrows, and you can actually hike there and follow the footsteps of Lewis and Clark. But yeah, the Native Americans are very scared, and they stay away, and they just let the little devils have their little mound. Yeah, take that as you will. Almost done here. The next one is Jesse James. So it's a very famous urban legend in South Dakota that happens in the city of Garretson. So according to the folklore, Jesse James, who was an infamous outlaw, successfully evaded capture in 1876 by leaping over the Devil's Gulch on horseback. So the Devil's Gulch is 60 feet deep and 20 feet wide. So trying to jump over this without spooking the horse is improbable. And a lot of people say it's impossible. But locals swear that it happened. It's a huge lore there. So Jesse ended up in Garretson in 1876 after his gang tried to rob a bank in Northfield, Minnesota, but they failed. So he fled west and stayed ahead of all of them because he was stealing horses. And the only way for him to keep going was to get over Devil's Gulch. And so there's a sign at the gulch that describes it. Says Jesse, quote, spun his horse and sprinted towards the chasm. With the lawmen watching with mouths agape, Jesse's horse hurled itself across the 20-foot gorge. So, of course, someone's going to find holes in the story. So the posse was about 20 poorly armed farmers. And, they had said his horse was named Pegasus, but in reality it was a half-broken farm horse and probably couldn't even jump over a fence. So Devil's Gulch is only like a half-mile long, and this made me laugh when I first saw it. Jesse could have just ridden around it, and that's actually probably what he did, is just rode around it. But hey, you never know what really happened. There also is a footbridge at the gulch, so you can look down below to really understand what Jesse James did, There's a sign there also that says, quote, don't let the water below the bridge fool you. There are areas in the canyon reported to be so deep they are bottomless. Just under the bridge is known as a bottomless pit. Many years ago, a 600-foot plumb line was lowered and no bottom was found. This came from a tourist. They were going on the bridge, and it's called the Devil's Stairway. And because they wanted to really see Jesse's accomplishment. So, 20 feet across, it doesn't sound like much, but they said that they looked up and realized how large that gap really is. And that if he had made that jump, it is something to brag about. That's no wonder it became folklore. So this story has been passed on from generation to generation, and the locals will tell you that they know for certain that he jumped and that this actually occurred. No doubt about it. But did it happen? And where's the evidence and all of this? So that's just a little story about Jesse James. And I put this one last because I think it's pretty crazy story. So this is about Spook Road. And it's more known to the locals as Spook Road because it's just this very eerie stretch of road in Brandon, South Dakota. And there are just collections of very creepy things happening there. So there's tunnels and bridges, and it's all lined with trees. And they say during the fall and the winter, it's even worse. Like very, very creepy. A lot of cars have wrecked on this road. And so it's said that when you're driving through, you have a very unsettled feeling while you're there. And, some believe, hey, it's just folklore. But a lot of people, like die-hard believers, will tell you it's real. And I guess there's even a Facebook group about Spooky Road. I didn't look it up, but I found a lot of information. So there's probably the most talked about legend in that area is when you're driving in one direction, you will go over 5 bridges, but on the way back you'll only cross 4. Another trigger warning: allegedly suicide victims can be seen hanging from both the bridges and the trees, their bulging dead eyes watching you. And it's said that a lot of full apparitions just appear on the road in front of you and then will vanish just as quickly. It's said that you constantly feel like you're being watched, and that you will see eyes peering at you from the dark. And of course, there's a cemetery along the road. But there's like this weird conspiracy theory that there's not a cemetery. Like some people see it, but some people don't. Very weird. Everything I saw said there was a cemetery. So, very weird right there. There was another story about a person reporting a demon deer that shot out of the trees on a very creepy, stormy night. There's also a lot of reports of occult activity. There's a group called the 605 Paranormal Society. They went on a 2-day investigation there. And they said this, quote, even though there's no documented history to support any of the claims of the road, is it possible that something is drawn to the area because people want it to be haunted? Remember that saying, be careful what you wish for because you might get it. This stretch of road just outside of Brandon, South Dakota has earned the nickname Spook Road after several people have reported mysterious encounters. Also, it said that when you're driving through the nighttime, you will see ghost figures or apparitions hiding in the trees. And, people claim this is the scariest place in South Dakota. So I found a story on Reddit from Kip7. Says, back in high school, we went out there a couple times to see what the hype was about, and it wasn't really anything special. Well, the last time we went out there senior year, there were 10 of us that piled into my car with 3 or 4 people in the hatch. Well, all looked good, and we were freaking out each other with stories about Spook Road and whatnot. We're driving down the road, and all of a sudden, in the dark, we notice a cemetery that we'd never noticed before. So we've stopped debating on whether or not to get out and check it all out. All of a sudden, you could feel the mood change. We were all freaked out. So we got going down the road, and nothing really happened after that, and we went home. When we got home, we were hopping out of the car, and someone went to open the hatch for the people to get out, and just absolutely freaked out. We all ran back, what? And there were dozens of handprint and finger marks all over the back and the side of the car. To this day, we're still spooked by it. I've gone back in the daytime and the cemetery is still there. We thought we were seeing things, but definitely did not see anyone else on the road that night, and nobody ever ended up getting out until we got home. Spooked. And then lastly here, I watched a YouTube video by a group called the Paranormal Files, and their tagline for this was the ghost hits our car on Spook Road. So there's a group of them, they all have cameras and stuff. They go out to this area because, and I didn't get this information, but there are stories of a lot of lynchings that happen there. There's an unmarked grave of an infant, and there's a cabin where a pioneer family lived and died in it. So first they go to the graveyard, and their equipment is a lot different from what Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures has, because they would put words on the screen that said, voices and stuff, but you can't really hear them. There are some that you kind of can, but the voices I really struggled to hear. But so they're in the graveyard. They hear disembodied voices. They heard a loud knock. Not sure where it came from, and they can just hear movement within the area. So instinctively, they start walking towards the end of the cemetery where they keep hearing these footsteps and these noises. Another noise comes through that sounds like it's a rock being thrown. And I'm not sure if it was thrown onto the ground, or I guess there was water over there, but a heavy object being thrown. They're walking around and they make a comment about, there's no breeze. It's nice out tonight. So then at one point they all go cold. And they're like, man, I'm cold. And this cold breeze starts to whip through in there. And these guys are just in t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, not much, and it was May in South Dakota, which May here in Montana, it was cold. I think, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, they seem to be comfortable. And then another large rock was thrown. Same noise as the first time. So they head back to the car. I guess they have to charge their camera battery. All 4 of them are sitting in the car, and they keep hearing knocks randomly on the car and on the car doors. And you can hear these knocks. Like that, it freaked me out. And then all of a sudden through the camera, there's this weird electrical noise and just taps and knocks on the car continually. And then this huge knock on the passenger car door just slams. Like if you were to hit your foot or your elbow on the side of the car, or, you know, they mentioned, you know, the guy maybe kicking the side of the door while he was inside. And he was like, no, I didn't do anything. I was just sitting here. So he opens the door. He stays in the car, but he just opens the door. Nothing out there. Shuts it. And then another tap came, like right after it, same spot. It's all over. Very, very weird. So then they travel up to this canyon that they were talking about, and they're just like instantly strange vibe. Heavy energy. So they talk about this. It was built by hand by a family called the Samuelsons in 1890, and they had a very early infant death that had happened there. So they're standing around. They hear a branch snap behind them. They're hearing whispers. They're getting extremely cold and chills, and the guys are talking about, I'm really uncomfortable. I want to go back. One of the guys sees a small light in the trees that does disappear. And so at one point they're sitting there, and I heard these going on because a noise came from inside the cabin. Like you could tell it was in there and it was hitting wood. And then you start hearing disembodied voices. So one of the guys knocks on the front door, and you can hear a woman's voice inside the cabin. And then another voice comes through, and then the feeling just got heavy. Tons of pressure, cold breezes coming through, and then all of a sudden they hear a woman start humming inside the cabin. Very creepy. So that was the end of that YouTube video. So those are all the stories I have for you today, guys. I know some were short, some were hopefully creepy for you, and I apologize for the first one. Again, I know it's a rough one for sure, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. So if you guys would like to follow me, I have an Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. I think that's it. All Dark Tales from the Road. And yes, I post these also on YouTube if you'd rather use it that way. It is just a picture. I do not know how to record myself, and I probably don't have the equipment to record myself talking, but maybe someday. And if you'd like to support the show, I have a Patreon and a Buy Me a Coffee. And now I'm super hungry, but yeah, join us next week for episode 30. We are going to the Sorrel Weed House in Georgia. So scary and so haunted. I'm pumped. Anyways, I hope everyone has an amazing Thanksgiving. I know this is coming out the Wednesday before, but I hope you listen while you cook or clean. That would be amazing. But yeah, I hope you, I know a lot of you don't celebrate Thanksgiving because you are living in other countries, but for the US, it is Thanksgiving week. And I have friends coming in, some of my best friends from Colorado when we all moved away. And so I'm very, 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 very excited about Thanksgiving this year. I'm usually not a big holiday person, but this one's exciting. So yeah, all you Americans have an amazing Thanksgiving week, and we will see you next week on the 30th of November, which is freaking insane that November's almost over already. And yeah, the 30th for episode 30, the Sorrel Weed House in Georgia. Thank you all for all of your amazing support, and I can't understand why you support me, but I greatly appreciate it. If you are loving the podcast, please go rate and review. It means so much to me. And even if it's bad, guys, even if it's bad, I want to hear the criticism. I don't hold grudges. Anyways, everyone have an amazing week this week. We'll see you next week. Bye, guys.